episode 47. Episode 47 is special for a few reasons. I think we're basically a month out from doing a year's worth of podcasts, which is great. 47 was also the football number of AJ Hawk in college, and I think maybe even the NFL. I can't remember. I think he changed in the NFL, but long story short, it was a favorite number of mine that I did not get to maintain in college, but anytime that number comes up, I always crack a little smile. Takes me back to those days. And it's also chapter 5 of my book, which is tentatively titled, chapter 5 is tentatively titled, Change the World. Today's theme is kind of like worthiness is the best way to describe it. I think at one time or another in someone's life, maybe all the time, people struggle with the concept of worthiness, like not feeling worthy. Our basic human limitations kind of frustrate us and make us feel like, like we're not worthy of some of the gifts and benefits that we receive for just doing our thing, whatever our gift is, sharing it with the world. Sometimes it's easy to not feel worthy, and it's a reminder I try to give myself all the time. So even though I have done things that make me feel shame or guilt in the past, maybe not acted to the best of my ability, that's no excuse to not make the next best choice the next time a choice comes around. And that entails just listening to your feelings about situations. Act without hesitation, but then take time to reflect and say, could I have shown up better? Was that a choice I needed to make? And ultimately, when that choice comes back around again, choose differently. Make a different choice. Make a better choice. And then, once again, make that choice and then see how you feel. If you reflect and you feel pride in your actions, you feel like honorable, even if it's uncomfortable, that's perfect. That's exactly what you want. That is the theme for today. Per usual, I do have both a TV show and a movie that kind of make me think about this topic a little bit more. We'll start with the movie. So one of my favorites of all time. I know sometimes I skew Marvel when I talk about superheroes. I think superheroes are a very interesting case. Today we're going to get after a DC superhero, and a DC superhero that is alien. I think one thing comic book writers do when they write comics, it's a very useful device, I feel. It's a device that helped break down my walls around worthiness. But they'll do something like Superman, right? Kal-El, Clark Kent, whoever you want to call him. They'll make him an alien. So he's from another planet. He's not of this world. So it's funny. It separates him from us. He's not human. So we can look at him objectively without bias. Without the bias of, oh, he's human. So he's obviously tragically flawed and not worthy. Now he's an alien, and now he could be worthy. So it's an interesting thing because it separates him from us, but then he works to integrate himself into humanity in our society, and it humanizes him and brings him back into the fold of humanity, and we slowly allow his virtues, his powers, his worthiness to seep into how we feel about ourselves. And I just think, as nerdy and silly as comic books can be, and all the different characters have all these different powers, and we kind of idolize them or wish we had them, it sinks into our deep unconscious. And again, it's this act of separation and then integration that allows us to feel that way about ourselves. And if you kind of have this Superman thing in your heart and you go about your day and, you know, you don't have laser eyes, you can't fly around, but you can stand up for someone, and then all of a sudden you feel like Superman. And that's really the magic of comics. So I talk about Superman because there's a specific scene in Man of Steel, specifically. Man of Steel is my favorite Superman comic of all time. The recent DC kind of Justice League movies, I feel like Henry Cavill Superman is the best representation of Superman, the same way I feel that Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne is just undefeated. And of course, the Joker with Heath Ledger was also undefeated. And there's a point in the movie where some kids are bullying young Superman. They pull him out of a truck, push him up against a fence, and what they don't see is his left hand is gripping this steel pole and he's crushing it because he's so angry. And they think that they have power over him and they're bullying him and it's making them feel a certain way. What they don't know is that they're in grave danger. There's this young Superman who doesn't quite have control of his anger yet, but he is holding it back, and his dad's there, so obviously his mind is aware that his dad's there and he doesn't want to disappoint him, so he kind of holds it down. And there's a scene earlier in the movie where a kid is on a bus. Superman's on the bus and a bunch of kids are on the bus, but one guy in particular that had kind of bullied him before, and the bus goes off a bridge. Superman pulls the bus up on land and saves all the people, and then there's this particular bully kid, he dives into the lake or the creek or river or whatever, saves this kid, and the kid's just like, clearly, okay, something's different about this guy. And it obviously left an impression on him, because now Clark's sitting there grabbing the fence, the steel pole, crushing it. This kid comes over and helps him up after, the bullies kind of walked away. And it's interesting, his dad comes over and goes like, hey, did they hurt you? And physically, he's indestructible. But for him to use that mental effort to hold himself back in the face of anger, like pain, just the fact that those kids were not being cool, that's kind of mentally and emotionally painful. And being able to keep his cool in the face of that is really the whole point. His dad goes off into this kind of monologue about, who you are, like good character, bad character, whoever you are, he's going to change the world. And kind of reinforcing like, hey, that was a painful moment, but you did the right thing. And that's really what he needed to kind of double down on that and continue to make those choices. So his dad really did him a huge favor in terms of, setting him up for repeat incidences of virtue in the face of not necessarily danger, but in the face of pain, and viewing that as an opportunity. So then it flashes back to the present time in the movie. His adversary, the bad guy, just shown up and basically said, hey, if you don't come out, we're gonna blow up the earth and destroy everything you hold dear. So he's still hidden. Nobody really know. Only his girlfriend kind of knows who he is and what he's up to. And he goes to a church. I think this is a really interesting juxtaposition of this alien with godlike powers, and he's going to the house of God that's kind of made and conceptualized by humans. And he talks to a priest and he goes, hey, I'm the guy they're looking for. And I don't quite trust, I don't quite trust what's happening here. And I don't trust, if I turn myself into humans, I don't trust them to make the right decision. And the priest kind of goes hey, sometimes you just got to take a leap of faith, and the trust part comes later. And I think that, once again, was just reinforcing his dad's message. Faith in that if you make the right choice, the right outcome will happen. That is genuinely one of the hardest things to do in life. And I think it takes conscious effort to do so. And I think ultimately it's just a really good example. It shows how superhero movies, it takes this alien guy who's not human, has all these physical abilities, but still vulnerable like humans, mentally and emotionally. And it equates us to Superman in a way. And I think ultimately inspires us, even though we don't have those physical powers, to, choose faith, choose to take that leap and have trust that even if the scenario doesn't go our way or for the greater good, that it'll still be something we can learn from and something that we can move forward on and put us on a path toward, some other end that will be good. So taking losses in the present, lose the battle, still feel worthy so that you can win the war. The war being kind of long-term goals and where you want to end up in life. So that's why I love Man of Steel. Now to flip over to kind of that was a pretty heavy version. This one's a little bit more comedic. So the show that this week made me think of was Larry David and Curb Your Enthusiasm. Not just Curb Your Enthusiasm, but also Seinfeld. So if you don't know who Larry David is, he's a kind of famous Hollywood comedy writer, comedian. And his style really is just calling out things about human nature that are genuinely unhelpful but widely accepted. So different social obligations or kind of awkward scenarios, places where people expect certain things of people but would never expect it of themselves or never give it in return. It's basically very absurd examples of real life things that happen. I mean, people genuinely do these things and give next to nothing and expect the world in return. And you can tell he just he just despises this in people. And his character in the show goes around and kind of tries to hold people accountable, and as a result is kind of ostracized or disliked, found to be like a malcontent. He does it in kind of a way that is obvious and funny, but also does kind of come off the wrong way. And I think, once again, just like Man of Steel, Larry David's human, so we can relate to him, but also when he makes it absurd, the absurd example is that's what allows us to separate. So a lot of people would never go to that absurd length to call people out, and that's what allows you to feel separate from it, kind of laugh at it, but then also he is human. At the end of the day, he has human needs for love and connection just like anyone else. So even though he kind of pushes people away, at the end of the day, he's always going to come back and try to connect. And so in that way, it's that same tension of he's different from me, but he's also the same. And those examples are awesome. The thing I loved about the way they ended Curb Your Enthusiasm, it brought it back to Seinfeld. So Seinfeld, the last episode, basically a bunch of stuff happens. I'm not going to go through all of it, but they kind of meet all the characters of the past and then come back to a scene where they're all in jail. And in jail for, kind of an absurd reason, just being held accountable for something that ultimately doesn't matter, but just happens to be a rule. And in the same way, that's what happened to Larry David in the last season. So it's really funny. So he goes to Atlanta, and there's basically a bunch of jokes about like racism, and he goes to Atlanta in the first place for a social event where he's kind of paid to make an appearance and be cordial. But he's just goes on and on about how he's not a cordial person. And in the face of, people who are kind of shitty, he's just like, hey, you're shitty. And he like won't hesitate to call people out. So at the party, of course, he runs into a lot of, different situations where people are just being very standoffish about like very silly things. And he doesn't hesitate to dive in and call him out. And it's very funny. And then obviously has an interesting interaction with kind of the guy that hosted the party that, was paying him to come out. And he kind of basically says like, hey, I'm not going to pay you. And Larry tries to settle the debate and, in a couple of different ways that kind of put him out. He says like, hey, okay, all right, I understand. I'll come back and do this. And kind of, it's all about boundaries and, the things that people do to try to exert control over each other or try to one up people. And he weaves this narrative. It's so interesting. So a side quest on this kind of episode or series is his roommate for the whole series, this guy Leon, he has family in Atlanta. I think it's his mom. And there's this whole thing with they have a lawn jockey that's actually like African-American lawn jockey versus a white lawn jockey. And there's all these like racial undertones, and it's very funny. They have an Airbnb with basically a black lawn jockey, and she was like, why did you pick this one? And like, what is this? And they're like, we're in the South, but we don't agree with it, but it's just our Airbnb. And like something happens to the lawn jockey, it gets broke, and they have to replace it for the Airbnb, but they don't want to, like, they don't actually agree with what it stands for. So it's just a whole like misunderstanding, miscommunication thing. And then it's also election time, which makes it even more funny. It's a kind of politics aspect of it. And so Leon's mom is in line, and it's a super hot day in Georgia, and everyone in line's kind of dying. And she's just like, oh man, she's a, kind of an overweight woman. She's standing in this long line to vote, and it's a commentary on what people have to go through just to exercise their right to vote. And she's like, oh, I'm so thirsty. And Larry brings her a bottle of water. And it turns out that that's illegal. So this woman that clearly just shouldn't be standing there needs a bottle of water. It's like basically sacrificing her health to exercise her right to vote. Needs water. Larry gets punished for it. But then on the liberal kind of politics side, he becomes kind of a folk hero for defying that rule and giving her the water when she clearly needed it. So he's going around and kind of has this like moral high ground, and everyone, for the first time, in the series, he's always kind of on the moral, low ground. Like most people would agree that what he did was the things that he does in the show are impolite, when in reality, the very same people judging him are very impolite nearly all the time. So calling him out for one instance when they're impolite basically the whole time. So he's now on the upside, and he eventually goes to jail. He's on this big kind of crusade to let off the charges. And it's this whole back and forth of like, he's in jail, he's out of jail, and I won't ruin the ending, but it is this whole thing of, he's human. He obviously has a superpower being funny. He has a superpower of kind of finding like small injustices in life and just standing up to them. Like in a situation where it'd be easier to keep your mouth shut, he decides to speak out. And, there is virtue and vice to that. But more often than not, he does a good job of showing how, what he's trying to do. Like he's coming from a good place. You can see how he's coming from a good place, even if he upsets some people. And this goes back to the whole worthiness thing of, even though he is flawed in how he delivers some of his feedback, it doesn't mean that his feedback is bad. It actually, I agree with a lot of the things that he's calling out. And I think a lot of people do too. And the rub is the choices that we make. When do we choose to keep our mouth shut because it's easy? When do we choose to speak up when, it's not our place, and it's hard to admit that we do the exact same things that we're calling out? Without looking at how we show up in the world, we call other people out because we get angry or it directly affects us negatively in some way. It's just very easy to be moral when it's not you in the situation. It's totally different when you are in a situation and you're forced to eat humble pie, or forced to do something you're afraid of, and something that may not benefit you positively, but again, lose the battle, win the war kind of thing. So those are the kind of two mediums that I'm consuming when I think about this chapter 5. When I think about changing the world, it is a balance between what you know to be righteous and how it's delivered. And if you try to do it at the wrong time, or in the wrong manner to the wrong people, like there's really no other way to do it but to stay true. The power of no is strong. Just kind of holding the line, and you don't even have to say no never. It could be no not yet. It could be just knowing that it's never black and white. It's never binary. It's never an ultimatum. There's always a third choice. That third choice is oftentimes just very difficult. It requires you to sit with some tension and be uncomfortable, maybe do something you don't want to do. But if you can sacrifice your ego and do that thing, it leaves space for something better. Obviously, the world right now, we have a lot of suboptimal outcomes, and it's a result of people not leaving space for something better. So no, not right now, could be just the power that you need to leave space for something better. And unfortunately, the only way to achieve this is to put yourself in these situations and sit with them. Again, like I said, sit with that tension and feel it out. if you can get past the uncomfortable feelings, the pain, be present in the now. Don't worry about the future. Don't worry about the past. Make the best decision that you can make for right now. Feel it out. Use your intuition, your gut, your heart. If you can do that, you're going to win and lose some battles, but you will win the war. And that war is just alchemizing bad in the world, the negativity, alchemizing it into good, and creating good outcomes, and creating a world where people can grow, where we can evolve as a species into something that is better than where we've been before. All we can ask for is progress, and any progress is good progress, no matter how slow. So I leave you today with the question, what is a small way that you could change the world? How can you show up and be that example in your life and alchemize pain into progress? So until next time, this is Blaine, and I'm out.